In the scorching heart of the Nevada desert, where the sun melts mirages into sand and silence, swallows sound whole, a young cowboy named Jake Sullivan made a discovery that would change everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. What began as a routine cattle drive across his family's sprawling ranch turned into an encounter that defied every law of nature and logic. When Jake found the creature collapsed beneath a Joshua tree, its silver skin shimmering like liquid mercury under the relentless sun, he made a choice that most would call insanity. He helped it. He couldn't have known that this single act of compassion would summon something far beyond his comprehension. Hours later, as the desert sky split open with lights that shouldn't exist, Jake realized he'd just become the most important person on Earth, or perhaps its greatest liability. This is the story of what happens when kindness bridges the gap between worlds, and when that bridge becomes a doorway for forces we were never meant to face. The desert had always spoken to Jake Sullivan in a language only he seemed to understand. At 23 years old, he'd spent more time under the vast Nevada sky than beneath any roof, learning to read the land like other men read books. The way a hawk circled could tell you where water pooled after rare rains. The angle of shadows revealed hidden canyons. The silence itself had texture. You could feel when something disrupted it. On that particular Tuesday in late August, Jake was 3 hours into moving a stubborn herd of cattle from the eastern pasture to the watering holes near Copper Ridge. His horse, a paint mare named Dusty he'd raised from a foal, picked her way carefully through the sage and creosote while Jake scanned the horizon with eyes the color of sun-faded denim. The Sullivan Ranch sprawled across 12,000 acres of high desert, land his great-grandfather had claimed in 1887. 4 generations had worked this unforgiving soil, and Jake carried that legacy in every calloused finger and sun-weathered line on his young face. The cattle moved like a lazy river, their lowing carrying across the flats. Jake's dog, a blue heeler mix named Ranger, worked the flanks with practiced efficiency, nipping at strays and keeping the formation tight. Everything was routine, predictable, exactly how Jake liked it. In a world that seemed to spin faster every year, with his friends moving to cities and trading their boots for dress shoes, the ranch represented something permanent, something real. It was Ranger who first sensed something wrong. The dog stopped mid-stride, his ears flattening against his skull. A low whine escaped his throat, unlike any sound Jake had ever heard him make. Dusty shifted nervously beneath him, her ears swiveling forward. Jake pulled the reins, bringing the mare to a halt. The cattle continued moving, oblivious, but every instinct Jake possessed screamed that something had changed in the desert's equation. "Easy, girl," he murmured, patting Dusty's neck. His eyes followed Ranger's fixed stare toward a cluster of Joshua trees about 200 yards northeast. The air itself seemed different there, thicker somehow, like looking through water. Heat mirages were common this time of day, but this was something else. The light bent wrong around those trees, creating shadows that pointed in impossible directions. Jake dismounted, looping Dusty's reins around a sturdy sage branch. He pulled his rifle from its saddle holster, not because he expected trouble, but because his grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Ranger stayed close to his heel as they approached the tree line, the dog's whole body tense and trembling. The smell hit him first, something between ozone and copper, sharp enough to make his eyes water. Then he saw the crash site. A furrow carved through the hardpan, maybe 30 feet long, ending at the largest Joshua tree. The sand had been fused into glass in places, still radiating heat despite the surrounding earth being relatively cool. Scattered around the impact point were fragments of something that looked like metal, but bent light around its edges in dizzying patterns. And there, propped against the tree's twisted trunk, was the creature. Jake's first instinct was to run. His second was to assume he'd finally succumbed to heat stroke. But Ranger's growl and the impossible evidence before his eyes confirmed this was real. The being was roughly humanoid in shape, perhaps 6 feet tall, but that's where similarities to anything terrestrial ended. Its skin, if you could call it skin, was a silvery gray that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states, like mercury trying to maintain a membrane. No visible hair, but what might have been sensory organs dotted the smooth surface of what Jake assumed was its head. The creature wasn't moving. Jake approached slowly, rifle raised but his finger off the trigger. Up close, he could see that the being was damaged. Dark blue fluid blood leaked from several wounds along its torso. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid movements. 3 eyes, arranged in a triangle formation on the upper portion of its head, remained closed, or maybe they had no eyelids. Jake honestly couldn't tell. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. The words felt inadequate, almost blasphemous given the magnitude of what he was witnessing. This was first contact. This was proof of life beyond Earth. This was everything humanity had wondered about for millennia, lying broken under a Joshua tree on his family's ranch. The rational part of Jake's brain screamed at him to call someone, the sheriff, the military, NASA, somebody. But his phone had no signal this far out, and the nearest working landline was a 40-minute ride back to the ranch house. More importantly, something in the creature's labored breathing triggered the same response Jake felt when he found injured animals. This was a living being in distress. Whatever else it might be, right now it needed help. Jake knelt beside the alien, studying the wounds. The blue fluid had stopped flowing from most of them, but one gash across what might have been a rib cage continued to seep. He had no idea about the creature's biology, but blood loss was blood loss in any species. He pulled off his bandana-faded red cotton his grandmother had given him years ago and pressed it gently against the worst wound. The moment the fabric made contact with the alien's skin, its eyes snapped open. Jake jerked back, nearly losing his balance. The eyes were unlike anything in nature, multifaceted like an insect, but with a depth that suggested impossible intelligence. They were a color Jake had no name for, something between violet and silver, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel simultaneously seen and analyzed down to his molecular structure. The creature made a sound, not a word exactly, but something that conveyed meaning directly into Jake's mind. Pain, confusion, fear, but also recognition, gratitude. The emotions washed over him in waves, and Jake realized with growing awe that this was communication more pure than language could ever achieve. "Easy," Jake said softly, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "I'm not gonna hurt you. Just trying to help." He had no idea if the being understood English, but his intent seemed to register. The creature's body relaxed slightly, though those extraordinary eyes never left his face. Jake examined the crash site more carefully. The object the alien had arrived in was barely recognizable as a craft, just twisted fragments of that impossible metal scattered across the sand. Whatever had brought this being to Earth was beyond salvage, which meant the creature was stranded, injured, and entirely dependent on the mercy of the first human to find it. That human happened to be a cowboy whose idea of advanced technology was a solar-powered fence charger. "All right," Jake said, thinking aloud. "You can't stay here. The sun's gonna kill you within hours, and I've got no way to explain a dead alien to the Bureau of Land Management." He looked back toward where he'd left Dusty. The cattle had wandered past, still heading toward water. He'd have to deal with them later. This was bigger than livestock. The problem was moving the creature. It was tall, and while its frame looked slender, Jake had no idea how much it weighed or how fragile its injured body might be. Plus, there was the not insignificant question of whether physical contact might poison him or trigger some kind of biological incompatibility. But as Jake watched the alien's breathing become more labored, he realized he didn't have the luxury of overthinking this. He'd made his choice the moment he decided to help instead of fleeing. "This is probably gonna hurt," Jake warned, positioning himself to lift the being. "But the ranch house is shade and water, and my mom was a veterinary nurse. If anyone can patch you up, it's her." He didn't mention that his mother had been dead for 3 years, that he lived alone now, or that his own knowledge of emergency medicine came entirely from treating injured cattle and horses. The alien didn't need to know how desperately unqualified Jake was for this situation. He slipped his arms under the creature's body. The skin felt cool and oddly smooth, like polished stone. Lighter than he expected, too, maybe 120 pounds despite the height. The alien made that soundless communication again, this time a spike of pain mixed with trust. That trust hit Jake harder than any words could have. This being, stranded 93 million miles from anything familiar, was placing its survival in his hands. Jake carried the alien to Dusty, who danced nervously at their approach. "Easy, girl. I know this isn't normal." Normal. The word felt like a relic from a simpler time, from the world that had existed an hour ago. Jake managed to position the alien across Dusty's saddle, securing it as best he could with lead ropes. The creature remained conscious, but still, those 3 eyes tracking his movements with disturbing precision. The ride back to the ranch took an hour, with Jake leading Dusty on foot, and Ranger following behind, periodically looking back as if expecting something to emerge from the desert after them. The sun climbed higher, brutal and indifferent. Jake draped his jacket over the alien's head and torso, offering what shade he could. They passed the cattle, now drinking at the water holes. In the grand scheme of the universe, they suddenly seemed very unimportant. Jake's mind raced with implications. The government would want to know about this. Scientists, military, probably half the alphabet agencies in Washington. But something instinctual held him back from that course of action. The creature in his care wasn't a specimen or a threat. It was a refugee, crashed and broken in a hostile land. Jake had spent enough time dealing with federal bureaucrats over ranch permits and grazing rights to know that turning the alien over to authorities would end with it dissected in some underground facility. No, at least for now, this was between him and the being he'd found. Whatever happened next, he'd make sure it had a chance to heal first, to tell its story, to be treated with the dignity any crash pilot deserved, regardless of their planet of origin. The ranch house came into view as the sun reached its zenith, a low-slung structure of adobe and weathered wood that had sheltered Sullivans for over a century. Home. Safety. Or at least the illusion of it. Because as Jake guided Dusty into the barn's blessed shade and carefully lowered the alien into a pile of fresh hay, he could unshake the feeling that helping this creature had just painted an enormous target on his back. On all their backs. But he'd made his choice in that moment under the Joshua tree, and Jake Sullivan was nothing if not committed to seeing his choices through. Getting the alien into the house proved easier than Jake expected. The creature seemed to understand the concept of shelter and cooperated despite its injuries, supporting some of its own weight as Jake helped it through the back door. They made it to his mother's old sewing room, now just a dusty space filled with forgotten projects, where Jake cleared a daybed and helped the being lie down. In the better light of the house, Jake got his first real look at his guest. The silver-gray skin caught the dim sunlight filtering through curtains, and he could see now that it wasn't actually skinhead, all but something more like a living suit, perhaps environmental protection or biotech he couldn't begin to understand. Beneath the wounds, symbols, or patterns flickered occasionally across the surface writing. Communication? Some kind of biological readout? The alien made that soundless communication again, and this time Jake perceived something like gratitude mixed with urgent warning. Danger. Coming. Must hide. Hide from what? Jake asked aloud, then felt foolish. But the creature seemed to understand his intent, if not his words. One of its hands, 3 fingers, and an opposable thumb, Jake noted gestured weakly toward the sky. "Someone's looking for you," Jake interpreted. The alien's three eyes pulsed with what might have been affirmation. Friendly or hostile? Even as he asked, Jake knew the answer from the wave of fear the creature projected. Whoever was coming, they weren't a rescue party. Jake's mind raced. He'd grown up on stories of Area 51, not far from here relatively speaking. Military installations dotted the Nevada desert. If something had crashed on his ranch, radar somewhere had probably caught it. Response teams might already be en route. He glanced at his phone, still no signal, which was actually suspicious now that he thought about it. The house usually had at least one bar. He moved to the window and scanned the sky. Clear blue, empty, except for a few clouds. But his rancher's instinct, the same one that told him when weather was changing or predators were near, screamed that they were running out of time. "Okay," Jake said, turning back to the alien. "First things first. Those wounds need treating." He retrieved his mother's old veterinary kit from the hall closet. She kept it stocked even after retiring. As he returned to the sewing room, he found the alien examining its own injuries with its three-fingered hands, that otherworldly skin rippling around the gashes. Jake opened the kit, suddenly aware of how primitive his medical knowledge was. Antiseptic, bandages, sutures, tools designed for Earth biology. He had no idea if any of this would help or harm. "I don't suppose you can tell me what you need?" he asked. The alien's hand moved to the largest wound, and Jake watched in fascination as the skin around it began to knit together on its own. Slowly, painfully, but definitely healing. Except the wound across the ribcage that once still wept blue fluid, the skin around it flickering with distressed patterns. "That one's not healing," Jake observed. The alien projected agreement and frustration. Something was wrong with that injury, something its natural healing couldn't overcome. Jake leaned closer and saw what looked like a fragment of that strange metal embedded in the wound. Shrapnel from the crash, probably preventing the tissue from closing. "I need to remove that," Jake said, reaching for surgical tweezers from the kit. The alien tensed but projected consent. Jake cleaned the tweezers with antiseptic, took a deep breath, and carefully began working the fragment loose. The blue blood that welled up had a strange quality to it, slightly luminescent, with a consistency between water and honey. The alien made no sound. Jake was starting to wonder if it could make sound, but he felt its pain as a sharp spike in his own nervous system. Empathic connection or some kind of psychic projection. Either way, Jake worked as quickly and gently as he could. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute, the metal fragment came free. It was barely larger than a grain of rice, but had done devastating damage. Immediately, the skin around the wound began knitting itself together. Within seconds, the flesh had closed completely, leaving only a faint silver scar that faded even as Jake watched. Remarkable. He carefully placed the metal fragment on the bedside table. It seemed important to keep, though he couldn't say why. The alien's three eyes focused on Jake with new intensity, and he felt a wave of profound gratitude wash over him. But beneath it, that persistent threat of warning. Danger. Coming soon. "Who's after you?" Jake asked again. This time, the alien seemed to marshal its strength for a clearer communication. Jake felt rather than saw images forming in his mind, not quite pictures, more like concepts that his brain translated into familiar terms. A ship, others like the alien. But wrong somehow corrupted, changed. Hunters. They'd been pursuing the alien across vast distances, through space that bent in ways Jake's earthbound mind struggled to comprehend. The crash hadn't been an accident. The alien had been shot down. You were running from your own people, Jake realized. The alien's confirmation came tinged with sorrow and regret. "What did you do?" The next burst of communication hit Jake like a physical blow. He saw a world not Earth, but somewhere else. somewhere beautiful with purple skies and geometric cities. He saw betrayal and transformation, saw the aliens' people being changed against their will by something ancient and hungry. Saw this being, one of the last unchanged, stealing a craft and fleeing into the cosmos with knowledge that could either save or doom entire civilizations. "Jesus," Jake whispered. "You're not just lost. You're carrying secrets someone once buried." The alien's affirmation carried weight that made Jake's chest tight. Whatever information this creature possessed, it was worth crossing the universe to recover or destroy. A sound cut through Jake's racing thoughts, distant but distinct. Helicopter rotors. Multiple aircraft from the sound of it, approaching fast from the north. Jake moved to the window and saw them, 3 black helicopters in tight formation, unmarked, heading directly for the ranch. "They're here," Jake said unnecessarily. The alien began to rise from the daybed, but Jake waved him back down. "No, you're in no shape to run. We need to hide you." His eyes swept the room, landing on the old cedar chest in the corner. Too small. The closet was full of his mother's things. The attic access was in the hallway too exposed. The cellar. The thought struck Jake with perfect clarity. The ranch house sat on top of an old storm cellar, dug deep during the Dust Bowl years. His great-grandfather had expanded it during the Cold War, paranoid about nuclear fallout. It was accessed through a trapdoor in the pantry, hidden under a rug and usually covered with storage boxes. Jake hadn't been down there in years. "Can you walk?" he asked. The alien projected affirmative determination and rose smoothly despite its earlier injuries. Whatever its biology, it recovered fast. Jake grabbed the medical kit, no sense leaving evidence, and led the way to the kitchen. The helicopters were closer now, their rotors creating a rhythmic thunder that shook the window panes. Jake shoved aside the boxes covering the pantry floor and pulled up the rug, revealing the weathered trapdoor. The iron ring handle protested when he pulled, rust flaking away, but it opened with a groan of ancient hinges. Darkness gaped below, and with it came the musty smell of earth and old concrete. A wooden ladder descended into the black. Jake flicked on the light switch miraculously. The bulb still worked, illuminating a space about 12 by 12 feet with 8-foot ceilings. Shelves lined the walls, still stocked with canned goods that were probably older than Jake. A folding cot in the corner, some old blankets in plastic storage bins. It wasn't comfortable, but it was hidden. "Down," Jake urged. The alien moved with surprising grace, descending the ladder despite its unfamiliar anatomy. Jake followed, showing the being how to arrange the cot and blankets. "Stay quiet. Don't come up no matter what you hear unless I come for you." He projected the words as images and feelings, trying to mimic the alien's communication method. Remarkably, it seemed to work. The creature projected understanding and agreement. Jake climbed back up, pulling the trapdoor closed and replacing the rug and boxes as quickly as he could. He'd just finished when the sound of vehicles pulling up outside joined the helicopter noise. Boots on gravel. Doors slamming. Commands being shouted in clipped military cadence. He walked to the front door on legs that felt steadier than they had any right to be. Years of dealing with difficult cattle and dangerous weather had taught Jake to present calm even when his heart was racing. He opened the door before they could knock, stepping out onto the porch with his hands visible and empty. 6 men in tactical gear fanned out across his front yard, assault rifles at the ready. The helicopters had landed in his north pasture, rotors still spinning. More soldiers disembarked, along with figures in white hazmat suits carrying equipment Jake didn't recognize. In charge of this circus was a tall man in his 50s, military bearing obvious despite the civilian suit he wore. Gray hair cut high and tight, eyes like chips of flint. "Jake Sullivan?" The man called over the rotor wash. "That's right. And you are?" "Agent Hendricks, Department of Homeland Security." He produced credentials that looked official, but told Jake exactly nothing. We need to ask you some questions about unusual activity in this area." "Unusual how?" Jake kept his voice level, curious but not defensive. Just a rancher wondering why his property was being invaded. "Radar detected an anomalous object entering atmosphere approximately 4 hours ago. Trajectory indicates it came down somewhere on your ranch." Hendricks' eyes never left Jake's face, studying him for tells. "Have you seen anything out of the ordinary today?" "Besides 3 military helicopters landing in my pasture without permission," Jake countered. "No, can't say that I have. Mr. Sullivan, this is a matter of national security. If you've encountered anything unusual debris, strange materials, anything at all, you need to tell us immediately." Jake let a moment pass, as if considering the question carefully. "I've been moving cattle all morning. Saw some coyotes, a golden eagle, couple of rattlesnakes. Nothing I'd call anomalous. It wasn't technically a lie, those things had all been present." He just left out the part about the crashed alien. Hendricks' expression didn't change, but Jake could see the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. "We're going to need to search the property. You got a warrant?" "We don't need a warrant for a national security incident, Mr. Sullivan." "Actually, you do. Fourth Amendment doesn't have an exception for national security. Last I checked. Jake's grandfather had been a county sheriff and constitutional absolutist. Those lessons were paying off now. You want to search my land, you go get a warrant from Judge Martinez in town. Until then, this is private property, and you're trespassing." Hendricks' jaw tightened. "Mr. Sullivan, I strongly advise you not to obstruct a federal investigation." "I'm not obstructing anything. I'm asserting my constitutional rights." "Big difference." Jake crossed his arms, aware that he was playing a dangerous game, but unable to see another option. If he let them search, they'd find the alien within minutes. Those hazmat suits weren't just for show. They probably had equipment that could detect biological signatures or radiation or whatever signature an extraterrestrial gave off. For a long moment, the two men locked eyes, Cowboy and federal agent, separated by not just profession, but by an unbridgeable gap in what they knew and what they wanted. Finally, Hendricks nodded slowly. "Have it your way. But understand this." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Jake could hear. "Whatever you think you're protecting, it's bigger than you, bigger than me. If there's something out here that doesn't belong, and you're hiding it, that makes you complicit in whatever happens next." "I appreciate the warning," Jake said flatly. Hendricks studied him another moment, then stepped back. "Pack it up," he called to his team. "We're getting proper authorization." He turned back to Jake. "We'll be back. And when we return, I better not find out you've destroyed evidence or moved anything off this property. That's obstruction of justice, and it carries 20 years federal time." "Looking forward to seeing that warrant," Jake replied. He stayed on the porch, watching as the soldiers retreated to their vehicles and helicopters. The aircraft lifted off in a storm of dust and noise, banking northwest toward what Jake assumed was some military installation. The ground vehicles followed, leaving deep tire tracks in the gravel drive. His phone buzz signal had returned, suspiciously convenient timing. Jake pulled it out and saw 17 missed calls and twice as many texts, all from numbers he didn't recognize. But one message stood out, from a contact he hadn't heard from in over 2 years. Dr. Sarah Chun, a xenobiologist he'd met at a university lecture in Reno that he'd attended with an ex-girlfriend. "Jake, if you've found what I think you found, do not trust the government. They'll dissect first and ask questions never. Call me on the encrypted number below. We can help. Sarah." Jake stared at the message. How did she know? How could she possibly know? Unless this wasn't the first contact. Unless there were already people on Earth who knew about extraterrestrial life and had been preparing for this exact scenario. He showed the phone to Ash, projecting his confusion and distrust. The alien studied the screen, then looked up at Jake with what might have been surprise or recognition. Ash projected images, other humans, other encounters. The revelation hit Jake like a punch. Earth had been visited before, multiple times, and some humans knew about it. Sarah's one of them, Jake realized. She knows aliens are real. The question was whether that made her an ally or just another group trying to control what happened next. Ash projected uncertain evaluation, but beneath it, desperate hope. The alien was running out of options. Its suit was failing, its enemies were closing in from above, and the only thing standing between it and capture or death was a cowboy who de-hulked it out of simple human decency. Jake made a decision. I'm going to call her. But if this goes wrong, if she turns out to be working with the feds or your hunters or whoever else wants you, we run. I've got a truck, supplies, and I know every back road and hidden canyon in 3 counties. They won't take you without one hell of a fight. He climbed back up to the kitchen, leaving the cellar door open so Ash could hear. With shaking fingers, Jake dialed the encrypted number Sarah had provided. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered. Thank God. I was afraid they'd already gotten to you. Who are you? Jake demanded. Who are you, really? Someone who's been preparing for this day since I was in graduate school. Someone who believes first contact should be humanity's greatest moment, not our greatest crime. And right now, someone who's aiming to keep your guest alive and free long enough to tell us why they re-here. How did you know? We monitor federal communications. When Homeland Security scrambled 3 black helicopters and a hazmat team to your location, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. Jake, listen to me carefully. You have maybe 4 hours before they come back with authorization to search your property. When they do, they'll bring equipment that can detect biological signatures through concrete. If your guest is still there, they'll find them. So, what do you suggest? Get them out? Now, I'm sending you coordinates for a safe house 3 hours west of your position. It's off-grid, shielded, designed for exactly this situation. Bring your guest there, and we can figure out the next step. And if this is a trap... Sarah's laugh was bitter. Then I'm the worst kind of traitor, and you're making a terrible mistake. But Jake, I'm asking you to trust me. More importantly, ask your guest if they trust me. Whatever they are, they can probably sense intention better than any polygraph ever built. Jake looked down through the open cellar door at Ash, who had climbed halfway up the ladder to listen. She wants us to go to a safe house. Says she can protect you. Ash was silent for a long moment, those 3 eyes unfocused as if perceiving something beyond normal senses. Then the alien projected cautious hope tinged with a warning trust. But verify. Stay alert. Be ready to run. We're coming, Jake said into the phone. But I'm keeping my rifle close, and if I smell a trap, we're gone. Fair enough. The coordinates are being sent to your phone now. There's an old mining road that'll get you most of the way without hitting main highways. The feds will have eyes on those. And Jake, thank you for helping them, for choosing to be better than the government that's supposed to represent us. Jake. She hung up. Jake stared at his phone as the coordinates appeared, plotting a route through some of the most desolate country in Nevada. 3 hours of driving through desert where cell signals were myths and help was measured in hours, not minutes. He looked at Ash again. Last chance to tell me this is a bad idea. The alien climbed the rest of the way out of the cellar and stood in the kitchen that it housed Sullivan's for over a century, looking somehow both completely alien and strangely at home. Ash projected determination and gratitude, and beneath it all, a fierce hope that maybe, just maybe, this world might be different from the one the alien had fled. All right then, Jake said, closing the cellar door. Let's go find out if humanity deserves the trust you're placing in it. He had no way of knowing that in orbit, above them, something was watching and waiting, and that his decision to help a stranded alien had just set in motion events that would determine not just the fate of one refugee but the destiny of 2 worlds. Jake's truck was a 1987 Ford F250, more rust than paint, but the engine was solid. He'd rebuilt it himself, knew every bolt and bearing, and trusted it more than anything newer. He backed it up to the barn's side entrance, out of sight from the main road and any surveillance drones that might be watching. Getting Ash into the truck presented unexpected challenges. The alien's height made the cab cramped, and its unfamiliar anatomy struggled with the concept of a seatbelt. Jake ended up removing the passenger seat entirely, creating a space where Ash could rest on blankets in a position that accommodated its different joint structure. He threw a tarp over the alien, then piled it with tools and feed sacks, just another rancher hauling supplies, nothing to see here. Before leaving, Jake loaded a bag with essentials: water, jerky, first aid kit, his rifle and ammunition, his grandfather's old revolver, $200 in cash, and the strange metal fragment he'd removed from Ash's wound. He added his mother's satellite phone, ancient but reliable in the dead zones they'd be traveling through. The mining road Sarah had indicated started 20 miles west, accessible only if you knew where to look. Jake took back roads out of his property, avoiding his main gate where federal surveillance would definitely be watching. The truck bounced over rough terrain, sage scraping the undercarriage. Ash remained quiet beneath the tarp, but Jake felt periodic waves of discomfort from the being as they hit particularly rough patches. "Sorry," he muttered. "This is the scenic route." They reached the mining road as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The track was barely visible, just twin ruts worn into hardpan decades ago by trucks hauling copper and silver. Jake shifted into four-wheel drive and committed to the path, knowing they couldn't turn back now even if they wanted to. The first hour passed in relative quiet. The desert opened around them in all directions, vast, ancient, and indifferent to human concerns. Jake had always found peace in this emptiness, but now it felt exposed. They were visible from the air for miles in any direction, and he kept one eye on the sky, watching for helicopters or the telltale contrail of surveillance aircraft. His phone buzzed. No signal. The message must have been queued from earlier. It was from Sarah. "Be advised, unusual orbital activity detected over your region. Stay off main roads. Do not stop until you reach the coordinates. Orbital activity." Jake's hands tightened on the wheel. That meant satellites at minimum, possibly worse. He thought about what Ash had shown him, about hunters pursuing the alien across the cosmos. If they were up there, circling Earth like vultures, what would they do when they found their prey? The answer came 30 minutes later. Jake saw the light, first a star that shouldn't exist in the wrong part of the sky, growing brighter by the second. He slammed the brakes, and the truck skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust. "Ash, we've got company." The alien threw off the tarp and peered through the windshield. Jake felt a spike of pure terror from the being. Not fear, but horror. The recognition of predators who had followed them across impossible distances. The light resolved into 3 distinct points, descending through the atmosphere with purpose and speed. They weren't falling. They were landing. And they were heading directly for Jake's position. "How are they tracking you?" Jake demanded. Ash projected frustrating uncertainty. The being had destroyed its ship's tracking systems before crashing. But these hunters had ways of finding their prey that transcended technology. Something biological, perhaps psionic, a connection that distance and destruction couldn't sever. Jake threw the truck into gear and floored it. The old Ford's engine roared, tires spitting gravel as they accelerated down the mining road. Behind them, the 3 lights touched down in a triangle formation, maybe 2 miles back. The ground shook with impacts that felt wrong, too heavy, too final, like reality itself was being nailed down. Through the rearview mirror, Jake watched as figures emerged from the landing sites. Even at this distance, he could see they were roughly humanoid, but moved with a predatory grace that was distinctly inhuman. They began advancing toward the truck with terrifying speed, covering ground faster than anything on Earth had a right to move. How fast can they run? Jake shouted over the engine noise. Ash's projected response made Jake's blood turned to ice. The hunters could sustain speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour for extended periods. On this rough road, Jake's truck could maybe manage 40, and that was pushing it dangerously. They weren't going to outrun them. Jake's mind raced through options. He could abandon the truck, take Ash on foot into the rocky hills to the north, but they'd be caught within minutes. He could try to fight, but his rifle was designed for coyotes and the occasional mountain lion, not whatever those things were. He could. His phone buzzed again. Sarah's voice crackled through a voice message, partially corrupted by poor connection. See them on satellite ... not federal ... something else ... Canyon 3 miles northwest ... fortified ... Code is ... The message cut out. A canyon, 3 miles northwest. Jake scanned the desert, spotted a dark gash in the earth that direction one of the many unnamed canyons that scarred this landscape. He yanked the wheel, leaving the mining road entirely and bouncing across open desert. The truck protested violently, suspension groaning, but held together. Behind them, the hunters adjusted their pursuit vector instantly. They were definitely tracking Ash somehow, able to sense the alien's location with precision. Jake caught glimpses of them in the mirror. Their forms seemed to shift and blur, as if they existed slightly out of phase with normal reality. Not quite invisible, but hard to focus on, like trying to look directly at something in peripheral vision. A sound cut through the engine noise, a high-pitched whine that made Jake's teeth ache and his vision blur. Ash projected urgent warning. The hunters were using some kind of weapon, something that disrupted neural function. Jake felt his hands beginning to spasm on the wheel, his thoughts fragmenting. Then Ash moved. The alien placed one 3-fingered hand on Jake's shoulder, and suddenly his mind cleared. Whatever the weapon was doing, Ash was shielding him from it, filtering the effect through its own nervous system. But Jake could feel the cost each second of protection drain the alien visibly, its silver skin flickering with distress patterns. The canyon, Jake pointed. They were close now, maybe half a mile out. The gash in the earth was deeper than he'd thought, a natural fortress carved by ancient water. If there was shelter there, something fortified like Sarah had said, they might have a chance. The whining intensified. Jake's vision tumbled, darkness creeping in from the edges. Ash's shielding was failing, the alien's strength spent by injuries, failing life support, and now this psychic assault. They weren't going to make it. In desperation, Jake did the only thing he could think of. He turned directly toward the nearest hunter and accelerated. If they were going to be caught, at least he'd take one of the bastards with them. The hunter didn't dodge. It stood its ground, and as the truck bore down on it, Jake got his first clear look at what had pursued Ash across the stars. It had been like Ash once he could see the underlying similarity in form, but it had been changed, transformed by something that wore flesh like a uniform. The silver skin was now a sickly gray-green, shot through with pulsing veins of something that glowed with diseased light. The 3 eyes were still there, but filmed over, dead-looking, as if whatever intelligence had once resided in them had been evicted and replaced with something else, something hungry. Jake hit it going 45 miles per hour. The impact should have pulverized any biological entity. Instead, the hunter went down but immediately began rising again, its body reforming from the damage with impossible speed. But those few seconds were enough. Jake swerved around the recovering creature and gunned the engine toward the canyon. They reached the edge going too fast to stop safely. Jake hit the brakes anyway, and the truck skidded sideways, nearly rolling before catching traction again. The canyon wall dropped 20 feet to a sandy floor below, with a narrow ramp carved into the side, probably put there by miners a century ago. Jake took the ramp at speeds that would have horrified any sane driver, the truck's tires screaming as they fought for purchase on loose rock. They hit the canyon floor hard enough to bottom out the suspension with a metallic crunch. Jake didn't slow down, racing along the canyon floor as the walls rose higher on either side, the sky narrowing to a strip of blue overhead. They're cut into the canyon wall about 200 yards ahead. A door, or something that had once been a door, now reinforced with modern materials that looked distinctly out of place in this ancient geology. Above it, Jake spotted what might have been cameras or sensors, dormant but present. The hunters reached the canyon rim. Jake felt their presence like pressure on his skull, malevolent and patient. They began descending the canyon walls, not climbing but flowing down the rock face like liquid, their bodies adapting to the terrain in ways that violated every law of physics Jake understood. He slammed the truck to a stop in front of the door and practically fell out, racing around to help Ash. The alien was barely conscious, its skin flickering erratically. Jake half carried, half dragged the being toward the door, searching frantically for any kind of keypad or lock mechanism. Nothing. Just smooth metal and stone, impenetrable. The hunters were halfway down the canyon wall. "Sarah!" Jake screamed at the sky, at his phone, at whatever gods might be listening. "We're here! Open the door!" Silence. Then, just as Jake was preparing to make his last stand with his rifle, he heard it, the deep thrum of heavy machinery activating. The door split down the middle and began sliding open with ponderous weight, revealing darkness beyond. Jake didn't wait to see what was inside. He pulled Ash through the opening, and the moment they cleared the threshold, the doors began closing again. The hunters reached the canyon floor, shrieking sounds that weren't sounds at all, but something felt directly in the brain. Rage and hunger and the promise of terrible things. The doors sealed shut with a final, definite boom, just as the hunters reached them. The impact of their bodies hitting the reinforced metal shook dust from the ceiling, but the doors held. Jake collapsed against the wall, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Ash lay beside him, barely moving, its silver skin almost gray now. They were safe. For the moment. Maybe. Emergency lights flickered on, revealing a corridor carved directly into the canyon rock, but reinforced with concrete and steel. Old military construction, World War II era by the look of it, but with modern technology grafted on. Jake heard ventilation systems humming to life, felt air pressure equalizing. Footsteps echoed from deeper in the facility. Jake raised his rifle, even though his hands were shaking too badly to aim properly. A woman emerged from the shadows, Asian, early 40s, wearing practical outdoor gear and an expression of intense relief. Dr. Sarah Chun. She looked exactly like her university photo, except for the pistol holstered at her hip and the hardness around her eyes that came from seeing things that changed you. "Don't shoot," she said calmly. "You're safe here. This facility is shielded. They can't track through the rock and metal." What the hell were those things? Jake demanded. "Corrupted," Sarah said, moving to kneel beside Ash. She pulled out a device that looked like a medical scanner, passing it over the alien's body. "Jesus, their life support is at 15%. We need to get them to medical immediately. Answer the question." Sarah looked up at him, and Jake saw genuine fear in her eyes. They're what happens when a species makes contact with something they called a convergence. A kind of ... infection, maybe? Transformation? We don't have good words for it. It takes individuals and rewrites them at a biological and possibly quantum level, turning them into soldiers for something vast and hostile that exists in the spaces between systems. Ash's people? Some of them? The ones who didn't resist, or couldn't. Your friend here, she nodded at Ash, is apparently one of the last uninfected members of their species. which makes them incredibly valuable and incredibly hunted. Jake processed this, his mind struggling with concepts that belonged in science fiction, not his life. Why didn't you tell me about those hunters? Would you have believed me? Would it have changed your decision to help? Sarah stood, offering Jake her hand. Come on. We can talk while we get your friend stable. There's a lot you need to know, and not much time to explain it. Jake let her help him up, then carefully lifted Ash. The alien was disturbingly light now, as if the damage and stress were somehow reducing its mass. Sarah led them deeper into the facility, through corridors that showed decades of secret purpose. This place, Jake said, it's been here waiting. This and 43 others like it across North America. Built by people who believed first contact was inevitable and that we needed to be ready to offer sanctuary when it happened. Conspiracy nuts and visionaries in equal measure, mostly dismissed as cranks until she stopped at a heavy door, entering a code on a keypad. Until we started detecting actual signals from beyond the solar system about 7 years ago. The door opened onto a medical bay that would have looked at home in any hospital, except for equipment that Jake couldn't begin to identify. Sarah helped him place Ash on an examination table, then immediately began connecting the alien to various monitors and scanners. 7 years ago? Jake said. That's when you changed careers. When you went from regular xenobiology to whatever this is. Someone had to take it seriously. Someone had to prepare for the day when a refugee crashed in our desert and needed help. She glanced at him. And someone had to hope that when that day came, there'd be a decent human being willing to risk everything to do the right thing. Screens around the medical bay lit up with data biological readouts, atmospheric analysis, cellular breakdown statistics. Sarah studied them with practiced efficiency, her fingers flying over controls. Their suit is failing faster than I thought, she muttered. The damage from the crash, the stress from running, the psychic shielding they did for you, it's all accelerated the degradation. She turned to a refrigerator unit and pulled out what looked like an IV bag filled with silvery fluid. This is synthetic atmosphere, compatible with their biology. It'll buy us time, but we need to repair the suit or get them back to space. Back to space? Jake stared at her. You have a way to do that? Not me personally. But there are others. People who've been preparing for this for longer than I have. We have resources, connections, even a few pieces of recovered technology we've reverse engineered. She attached the 4 to a port in Ash's suit that Jake hadn't even noticed. The silvery fluid began flowing, and almost immediately, the alien's skin stopped flickering. The question is whether we can move your friend before those hunters find another way in. As if in answer, a klaxon began blaring. Red lights flashed along the corridor outside. Sarah's face went pale as she checked a wall monitor showing security feeds. The hunters weren't trying to break through the door anymore. They were doing something else, something worse. The 3 of them had joined together, their bodies melting and reforming into a single massive entity. And that entity was beginning to dig through the canyon wall itself, tearing through solid rock with bare hands that had become something like industrial drills. How long? Jake asked. Sarah checked calculations on her screen. At that rate? Maybe 2 hours before they breach. Less if they figure out the weak points in the structure. Then we need to go. Now, Ash can't be moved yet. They need at least 30 minutes to stabilize, or the stress will kill them. Sarah turned to Jake with desperate determination. We have to hold those things off long enough for your friend to survive. And I have to tell you, our defensive options are limited. This facility was designed to hide, not fight. Jake thought about the hunters reforming after being hit by his truck, about how they moved through space like predators that had never known prey that could resist. He thought about Ash, lying on the medical table, trusting him to protect what they carried, knowledge that could save or doom civilizations. Do you have explosives? Jake asked. Sarah blinked. This is an old military installation. There's an armory with "Show me." As they ran toward the armory, leaving Ash in the medical bay with monitoring equipment beeping steadily, Jake felt something shift inside him. He'd spent his life as a rancher, dealing with weather and livestock, living simply and asking for nothing more than to be left alone. But that life had ended the moment he chose to help a dying alien under a Joshua tree. Now he was something else, something that stood between hunters and prey, between invasion and sanctuary, between the universe as it was and the universe as it might become if people chose compassion over fear. He didn't know if they'd survive the next 2 hours, didn't know if humanity deserved the trust Ash had placed in it, but he knew that he'd rather die trying to be worthy of that trust than live knowing he'd failed. The armory door opened before them, revealing weapons and supplies from decades of secret preparation. Jake selected what he needed with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years on a ranch, where every tool had a purpose and hesitation could be fatal. "All right," he said, loading explosives into a pack. "Let's show these hunters what happens when they corner something on their home ground." Sarah checked her weapon, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. "You know, we're probably going to die, right?" "Probably," Jake agreed, "but not definitely." And in that gap between probably and definitely, that's where miracles live. They moved toward the breach point, toward the sound of rock being torn apart by entities that had crossed the cosmos to claim what they believed was theirs. Behind them, Ash lay healing, carrying secrets that 3 species were willing to kill for. The battle for Earth's first refugee had begun, and Jake Sullivan, Cowboy and Sanctuary Keeper, intended to make sure it was a fight these hunters would remember, assuming any of them survived to remember anything at all. The facility's layout worked in their favor. The hunters were digging through the western wall, which meant Jake and Sarah could funnel them through a narrow access corridor, a kill zone, if they set it up right. The old military engineers had understood defensive architecture, even if they'd been planning for different enemies. Jake placed charges at strategic support points, while Sarah rigged motion sensors and what she called neural disruptors, experimental weapons designed based on theoretical xenobiology. Neither of them mentioned the obvious problem. They were preparing defenses based on assumptions about physics and biology that the hunters might laugh at, assuming they still could laugh. "Tell me about the convergence," Jake said as he wired detonators. His hands were steady now, the initial panic burned away by purpose. "If we're dying to stop it, I should at least understand what it is." Sarah positioned the disruptor unit, checking angles with a laser measure. "Imagine something that exists partially outside our normal space-time, not quite in our dimension, but pressing against it like water against a membrane. Every few million years, it finds a way through, usually when a spacefaring species gets advanced enough to thin the barriers between dimensions with their technology, and it infects them. Infects, transforms, conscripts, pick your verb. The result is the same. Individuals lose autonomy and become extensions of a vast networked intelligence. They retain skills and memories, but serve only the convergence's agenda. Spread to new systems, incorporate new species, expand until there's nothing left unconverted." Jake thought about the hunters tearing through rock above them. Ash's people discovered it? Or created it accidentally? Or awakened something that had been dormant? The timeline isn't clear from the fragmentary signals we've intercepted. Sarah moved to the next position. What is clear is that Ash's species had a choice: submit and join, or resist and face extinction. Most chose submission. Ash is one of maybe a dozen who escaped. Carrying what? "You said they had knowledge worth killing for." Sarah's expression turned grim. "A weapon, or a cure, possibly both. Something that could theoretically sever the convergence's connection to infected individuals, restore their autonomy. Or, if used differently, destroy entire networked populations. Ash's people created it in desperation, then realized it was too dangerous to use. The transformed ones want it destroyed. Ash wants to preserve it until someone trustworthy can decide its fate, and Ash chose to crash land here on Earth. Why? Maybe they were running out of options. Maybe they deheard. Earth was approaching spaceflight capability and hoped a young species might be less corrupt than the old ones. Or maybe, Sarah paused, listening to the sound of tearing rock growing closer. Maybe they just got lucky and found one decent human in the right place at the right time. The corridor shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. The hunters were close now, maybe minutes away from breakthrough. Jake finished the last detonator and moved to the corridor's far end, where they'd set up their final defensive position behind reinforced barriers. When this starts, it's going to be loud and ugly. I spent 6 years preparing for first contact, Sarah said, checking her weapon. I imagined diplomacy, cultural exchange, maybe some tense negotiations. Never pictured myself in a firefight in an underground bunker, protecting an alien from its own corrupted species while the federal government hunts us all. Life's funny that way. She laughed, slightly hysterical. You're taking this remarkably well for a rancher who found an alien 12 hours ago. I've dealt with stampedes, wildfires, and cattle thieves with automatic weapons. This is worse, but the principle's the same. Stay calm, trust your instincts, and make every shot count. Jake loaded his rifle, the familiar weight of it grounding him. Besides, I made a choice back in that desert. Committed to it. No point second-guessing now. The western wall exploded inward. Not a breach-in eruption, as if the hunters had finally lost patience with subtlety. The combined entity that came through was nightmare given form, a fusion of 3 bodies into something that borrowed the worst aspects of each. Multiple eyes, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at, limbs that ended in tools for killing, skin that rippled between solid and liquid, gray-green, and shot through with that diseased luminescence. It saw them. Recognition flashed across its multiple faces. Ash's scent, Ash's trail, prey cornered at last. It charged. Jake triggered the first explosive. The corridor support beams came down in a thunder of concrete and rebar, tons of material crashing directly onto the hunter. For a moment, Jake thought they'd actually done it, buried the thing under enough mass to matter. Then the rubble began moving. The hunter wasn't stopped, merely slowed, its incredible strength allowing it to shove aside debris that should have crushed anything biological into paste. Sarah triggered the neural disruptors. The units hummed to life, filling the corridor with energies that made Jake's skin crawl even from behind the shielding. The hunter staggered, its movements becoming uncoordinated. It made sounds awful, grinding noises like metal being torn. But it kept coming. Jake aimed for what looked like sensory organs and fired. The rifle cracked, impossibly loud in the enclosed space. His bullet struck true, punching through one of the hunter's eyes. Blue-black fluid sprayed, and the creature recoiled. Then it healed. Right before Jake's eyes, the tissue knit itself back together in seconds. The eye reformed, possibly even more focused than before. Sarah, Jake said quietly, your disruptors aren't working. I see that. Her voice was tight. Plan B. We have a plan B? Run. They ran. Back through the facility, Jake triggering the remaining explosives as they passed, bringing down sections of corridor behind them. It wouldn't stop the hunter, but it might slow it. Might buy them minutes. They reached the medical bay to find Ash sitting up, silver skin no longer flickering but still pale. The alien had disconnected from the four and was attempting to stand on shaky limbs. No time to ask if you're ready, Jake said, moving to support Ash. We've got to move. Sarah was already at a computer terminal, pulling up schematics. There's an emergency exit on the eastern side. Leads to a service tunnel that emerges 2 miles down the canyon. If we can reach it. The facility shook. The hunter had reached the medical bay's outer door and was tearing through it with the methodical efficiency of something that had done this 1,000 times across 1,000 worlds. Go! Jake shoved Sarah toward the emergency exit. She ran, and he helped Ash follow, the alien's weight against him feeling less than it had before, as if the being was somehow lighter, more ethereal. They reached the emergency exit, a circular hatch in the floor with a ladder descending into darkness. Sarah went first, then reached up to help guide Ash. The alien's unfamiliar anatomy made the ladder difficult, but they managed, climbing down into a tunnel that smelled of damp rock and recycled air. Jake followed last, just as the hunter burst into the medical bay behind them. He saw it through the hatch, noticed the medical equipment, the monitors still displaying Ash's biological data. It paused, and Jake realized with horror that the creature wasn't just strong and relentless. It was intelligent, calculating. It looked directly at the hatch, and Jake saw recognition in its multiple eyes. Then it did something unexpected. It turned away from them, moving to the medical terminal. It's accessing the data, Sarah realized from below. It's learning about Ash's condition, their biology, which tells it how to kill them. Jake finished. He dropped the hatch and spun the locking wheel, sealing it. It wouldn't hold long, but they didn't need long. Just enough. They ran through the service tunnel, emergency lights flickering on as motion sensors detected them. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them into single file, Sarah leading with a flashlight. Ash in the middle, Jake bringing up the rear with his rifle ready. Behind them, the sound of metal tearing. The hunter was through the hatch. How far to the exit? Jake called. 1.5 miles. Maybe 10 minutes at this pace. They didn't have 10 minutes. Jake could hear the hunter in the tunnel behind them, moving faster than they could run, closing the distance with predatory patience. It wasn't rushing now. It had them trapped, cornered. It could take its time. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, some kind of junction point where multiple service tunnels converged. Ancient machinery lined the walls, purpose unclear. And there, on the far side, another door. The exit. They were 50 feet from freedom when the hunter emerged behind them. Ash turned, facing the creature that had once been its kin. Jake felt waves of emotion from the alien: grief, rage, determination, and beneath it all, terrible understanding. Whatever the convergence had done to these hunters, it wasn't their fault. They were victims as much as threats. The hunter spoke. Not in words, but in that same psychic projection Ash used, except corrupted, distorted, wrong. Jake felt it like knives in his brain. Give us the key. Give us the weapon. Join us, and the pain stops. Resist, and we hollow you out and take it anyway. Ash responded, and even though Jake couldn't understand the full complexity of the exchange, he caught fragments: refusal, defiance, a promise that the knowledge would die before being surrendered to the convergence. The hunter lunged, but Ash was ready. The alien's body flared with light, not the silver of its normal skin, but something deeper, something that came from the core of its being. The light hit the hunter like a physical force, driving it back, making it shriek in that brain-scraping way. The weapon, Sarah whispered. Ash is using it. Jake saw it now, saw patterns in the light, mathematical precision that spoke of knowledge so advanced it looked like magic. The hunter's body began to destabilize, its gray-green corruption smoking, peeling away. For a moment, Jake saw what the creature had been before transformation: graceful, intelligent, beautiful. Then the light faded. Ash collapsed, the effort too much for its damaged body and failing life support. The hunter staggered but remained standing, its corruption reasserting itself as the weapon's effect ended. It had been hurt, maybe even partially free for those few seconds, but the convergence's hold was too strong. It adapted, learned, prepared to resist if Ash tried again. But Ash couldn't try again. The alien lay unmoving, possibly unconscious, possibly worse. Jake stepped between the hunter and Ash, rifle raised even though he knew bullets were useless. You want them? You go through me. The hunter regarded him with those multiple eyes, and Jake felt its attention like a weight. It was evaluating him, determining if he was a threat or merely an obstacle. Then Sarah shot it. Not with her pistol, with something she'd pulled from a pack Jake hadn't noticed she was carrying. A device that looked cobbled together from spare parts and desperate hope. It fired a beam of the same light Ash had produced, except sustained, amplified. The hunter screamed. Its body began coming apart, corruption burning away like fog before sunrise. But this time, the process continued. The light dug deeper, reaching into whatever quantum spaces the convergence inhabited, severing connections, isolating the individual from the network. I reverse-engineered it, Sarah shouted over the sound. From signals Ash's people broadcast before their world fell. It's incomplete, unstable, but the device exploded in her hands. Sarah flew backward, hitting the wall hard. The light vanished, but the damage was done. The hunter stood in the center of the chamber, no longer gray-green but silver. Its corruption burned away. Its eyes now just three, arranged normally, blinked with confusion and terrible clarity. It looked at its hands, at Ash lying on the ground, at Jake and Sarah. It spoke, and this time the psychic projection wasn't corrupted. What have I done? What have we done? Then its body began to fail. Whatever the convergence had done to keep these transformed beings alive, the weapon had severed it. The hunter sank to its knees, and Jake saw not a monster but a person who'd been enslaved, used, and was now dying with the weight of their actions crushing them. I'm sorry, the hunter whispered directly into Jake's mind. We didn't know. Couldn't fight. The convergence ... it takes everything. Makes you watch while you hunt your own. Its eyes found Ash. Little Ash, always asking questions, always refusing to accept limits. You got away. You kept the key safe. The others, Jake said. The other two hunters, are they coming? The network knows what happened here. It's sending more. The hunter's form was dissolving now, whatever held its biology together finally failing. Get Ash home. Get them to the sanctuary, beyond Orion. Others there. Free ones. They can complete the weapon. Use it to save what's left of our people. I don't know how to get to Orion, Jake said desperately. I don't even know how to get Ash back to space. The hunter's laugh was bubbling, wet. The federal humans, they have a recovered ship. Roswell. Real place. Wrong year. Force them to use it. Take Ash home. Save our people. Its eyes began to close. And Cowboy, thank you for showing kindness. For reminding us that not all species become what we became. The hunter dissolved into silvery dust that faded like morning mist. Jake stood in the silence that followed, his rifle still raised, his heart hammering. Sarah was stirring against the wall, groaning. Ash remained motionless on the ground. And somewhere above them, two more corrupted hunters were coming, along with whatever federal forces Hendricks had mobilized. They'd survived one battle, but the war for Ash's freedom, for the weapon, for Earth's place in a cosmos far more dangerous than anyone imagined, was just beginning. Jake helped Sarah to her feet, then gathered Ash in his arms. The alien was still breathing, barely. The exit, Jake said. We move? Now. They stumbled through the door into the service tunnel beyond, leaving behind dust and darkness and the first casualty of Earth's introduction to galactic politics. Above them, stars turned in their ancient paths. And among them, things were watching, waiting, preparing to descend on a small planet that had just announced itself as a place where refugees could find sanctuary and where corrupted empires might find unexpected resistance. Jake Sullivan, Cowboy and accidental ambassador, had just declared humanity's stance in a conflict spanning galaxies. Now he had to survive long enough to make that declaration mean something. The service tunnel emerged in a slot canyon 5 miles from the facility, far enough that Jake hoped they'd bought themselves breathing room. Dawn was breaking over the desert, painting the rock walls in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful, indifferent. The universe didn't care if they lived or died. Sarah had a concussion and possible broken ribs from the device's explosion. Jake had carried Ash the entire way, and his shoulders screamed with exhaustion. They collapsed in the shade of an overhang. 3 beings who just survived something most people would never believe happened. Jake's satellite phone had signal. He pulled it out, hands shaking from adrenaline crash. Who do we call? Who can possibly help with this? Sarah coughed, wincing. There's a network. People who've been preparing. But if we bring them in, we bring in everyone they're connected to. Word spreads. And the government, Hendricks, and whoever he reports to, they have ways of monitoring even encrypted channels. The hunter said the feds have a ship, Roswell. Jake looked at Ash, who was breathing but hadn't regained consciousness. If that's true, it's true, Sarah interrupted. I've seen documentation. Fragments, secondhand accounts, but enough to know they've had extraterrestrial technology for decades. They've been reverse engineering it, trying to build their own spacecraft. Unsuccessfully, from what I've heard, but the craft itself is intact enough to potentially fly. Then that's our play. We get to Roswell, we commandeer the ship, we get Ash to this sanctuary beyond Orion. Sarah stared at him. Jake, that's insane. Roswell is a military installation. We'd be declaring war on the United States government. They've already declared war on us. Or did you miss the part where they're hunting an injured refugee? Jake's voice was harder than he'd ever heard it. The way I see it, we've got 2 choices. We hand Ash over to people who'll dissect them like a biology project. Or we do something so crazy it might actually work. Before Sarah could respond, Ash stirred. The alien's eyes opened, focusing on Jake with visible effort. The being was weak but conscious, and the waves of emotion Jake felt were complex gratitude, determination, and something like awe. You fought for me, Ash projected. Your species. You fought my species' corruption. Why? Because it was the right thing to do, Jake said simply. And because I figure if we're going to join the galactic community, we should start by showing we're better than the worst things in it. Ash was silent for a long moment, then projected something that took Jake a moment to interpret. Profound hope. Your people, not all corrupted yet, still have choice, still have chance. Yet, Sarah caught the implication. Ash, is Earth in danger of convergence infection? The aliens struggled to sit up, and Jake helped support them. Ash's projection became more focused, sharing information with desperate urgency. Earth had been noticed. The convergence was aware of humanity's approaching spaceflight capability. In cosmic terms, humanity was about 5 minutes away from thinning the dimensional barriers enough for the convergence to slip through. How long do we have? Jake asked. Ash's response made his blood run cold. Maybe 10 years, maybe less. The moment humanity achieved practical FTL travel, or started seriously manipulating quantum fields, they'd be vulnerable. Unless they had the weapon. Unless they could deploy it before the convergence established a foothold. So getting you to Sanctuary isn't just about saving your people, Sarah realized. It's about saving ours, Ash projected affirmation. The weapon needed to be completed, tested, deployed before the convergence noticed Earth was becoming capable of resistance. If humanity remained primitive and isolated, they might be overlooked for centuries. But if they started reaching for the stars while carrying a completed anti-convergence weapon, we become a threat instead of a target. Jake finished. We get one shot at this. We either join galactic civilization armed and dangerous, or we get swallowed like Ash's people were. No pressure, Sarah muttered. She pulled out her phone, which was cracked but functional. All right, if we're doing this, we need help. Real help. I have contacts in the network who can get us weapons, transport, maybe even inside information on Roswell security. Make the calls, Jake said. I'll watch the sky. While Sarah worked the phone, speaking in careful code to people whose names Jake never heard, he studied the horizon with the same attention he'd once reserved for predicting weather. The desert looked empty, but he knew better. Satellites overhead, probably drones circling at altitudes that made them invisible to naked eyes. The federal government throwing every resource at finding one crashed alien and the humans who'd chosen to protect it. And somewhere above the atmosphere, two more corrupted hunters circling, waiting for their moment. Ash rested against the canyon wall, conserving strength. Jake sat beside the alien, rifle across his lap. Tell me about your world, Jake said quietly. Before the convergence, what was it like? The images Ash projected were beautiful cities that grew like crystals, following mathematical patterns that served both aesthetic and functional purposes. A culture built on shared consciousness and individual expression in balance. Art that existed in 4 dimensions, music that you experienced with your entire body, philosophy debated through direct mind-to-mind connection where truth couldn't hide behind words. Sounds like paradise, Jake said. Ash's response carried profound sadness. It had been paradise. Until they'd reached too far, opened doorways they didn't understand, and invited something ancient and hungry into their reality. The convergence hadn't invaded through military force. It had arrived as curiosity, as academic inquiry, as the promise of transcendence. By the time Ash's people understood what they'd welcomed, it was too late for most of them. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, Jake murmured. My grandfather used to say that. Guess it's true across the universe. Sarah returned, tucking her phone away. Okay, I've got a team mobilizing 8 people, former military and intelligence, all true believers in the cause. They'll meet us in Socorro, New Mexico, 24 hours from now. From there, we have a narrow window to hit Roswell during a shift change when security is lightest. 24 hours, Jake repeated. Can Ash survive that long? They both looked at the alien, whose silver skin was dimming again despite the synthetic atmosphere treatment. Ash projected uncertain affirmative, maybe 24 hours, maybe less. The suit's failure was accelerating, and without proper equipment to repair it, death was approaching. Then we move fast and we don't stop, Jake said. He stood, helping Ash to their feet. How far to Socorro? 200 miles. But we can't take roads too much surveillance. We'll have to cut cross-country through some of the most desolate terrain in North America. Jake looked at the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. His home, his heritage, now his battlefield. I've spent my whole life in this desert. If anyone can navigate it blind and off-grid, it's me. They salvaged what they could from their gear water. Food, medical supplies, weapons. Sarah had a vehicle stashed 10 miles north, hidden in preparation for exactly this kind of emergency. The walk would be brutal in the climbing heat, but manageable if they paced themselves. They started moving as the sun cleared the horizon. Ash walked with visible difficulty, but refused to slow them down, drawing on reserves of will that impressed Jake deeply. This being had been shot down, hunted, injured, and was now dying by degrees. Yet they kept moving forward with a determination that spoke of something more than survival instinct. Purpose, mission, the weight of being possibly the last hope for 2 civilizations. 2 hours into the march, Jake's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Federal blockade establishing perimeter around Nevada-New Mexico border. They're locking down the region. See, Sarah's contact, warning them. They're corralling us, Sarah said, reading over his shoulder. Hendricks isn't just hunting, he's trapping. They probably have our general location from satellite thermal imaging, and they're closing the noose. Jake studied the terrain ahead. Canyon country, a maze of stone that satellites struggled to penetrate. but also terrain that could trap you if you didn't know the paths. There's a way through. Route that traders used during Prohibition to move bootleg across state lines. My grandfather showed it to me when I was 12. It's rough, barely navigable, but if the feds don't know about it, we can slip through. And if they do know about it, then we improvise. Jake adjusted Ash's weight as the alien stumbled. We've gotten this far on luck and stubbornness. I'm not about to give up now. Then something changed. Hendricks pulled out a phone, listened, and his face went pale. He looked up at the sky, and Jake followed his gaze. Lights, multiple lights, descending through the atmosphere with the same purposeful trajectory he'd seen earlier. But these weren't 3 hunters. These were dozens, maybe hundreds. What the hell? Hendricks started. Ash projected urgent explanation, and somehow, whether through the alien's power or sheer desperation, everyone present felt it. The Convergence had noticed the weapon being used, had traced the signal back to Earth, and now it was coming in force, not just to retrieve Ash and the weapon, but to claim humanity as its next conquest. Earth's grace period had just ended. Hendricks stared at the descending lights, calculation visible on his face. Then he made a decision. How do we fight them? You can't, Jake said. Not without the weapon, and the weapon isn't finished. Ash needs to reach Sanctuary beyond Orion, where their people can complete it. Sanctuary beyond... Hendricks shook his head. We don't have interstellar capability. We've been trying to reverse engineer alien technology for decades with minimal success. You have a recovered ship at Roswell, Sarah said. We need it. We need it now, and we need someone who can pilot it. That ship barely functions. We've never gotten it to do more than hover. Ash projected confident determination. They could pilot it, could get it to Sanctuary, could complete the weapon and return to help Earth prepare for what was coming. Hendricks looked between Jake, Sarah, and Ash, and his agents at the approaching lights. At the end of the world as humanity knew it descending from the stars. I'll be court-martialed for this. Probably executed for treason. Or you'll be remembered as the man who saved the human race, Jake said. Your call. The lights were closer now. Jake could make out individual shapescraft that moved with predatory grace, each probably carrying multiple corrupted hunters. They had minutes, not hours. All units, fall back, Hendricks ordered. We're escorting these civilians to Roswell. Anyone who objects can file a complaint with whatever government's left standing after tonight. He turned to Jake. You better be right about this. Cowboy, I'm rarely right about anything, Jake admitted. But I'm committed, and that counts for something. They loaded into vehicles, Jake's truck, flanked by federal SUVs and a military transport. The convoy raced east at dangerous speeds, chasing the sunrise and their only hope. Behind them, the first hunter craft touched down, and Jake didn't need psychic powers to imagine what was emerging from them. Sarah worked frantically in the back of the truck, trying to stabilize Ash for what promised to be a rough ride. If we survive this, I'm writing a memoir. No one will believe it, but I'm writing it anyway. If we survive this, Jake said, I'm going back to ranching. Let someone else save the galaxy next time. Ash's response was the closest thing to laughter. Jake had felt from the alien a pulse of warmth and amused affection. Despite everything, despite approaching death and galactic invasion, the being who'd crashed in Jake's desert maintained hope. The convoy tore through the New Mexico desert as dawn painted the sky in shades of fire. Ahead, the restricted airspace of Roswell beckoned. Behind, an invasion force spread across the American Southwest like a plague. And in the balance, one injured alien, one stubborn cowboy, one determined scientist, and one federal agent who'd just committed treason, all bet everything that compassion and courage could overcome corruption and conquest. The climax was approaching. The moment when Jake Sullivan, who'd only ever wanted to work his ranch in peace, would either help save 2 civilizations or witness their mutual destruction. He pressed the accelerator harder. The truck's engine roared. Ash's hand rested on his shoulder, projecting gratitude and trust. And Jake drove toward destiny like he'd driven cattle his whole life, with determination, focus, and the unshakable conviction that you saw your commitments through to the end, whatever that end might be. Roswell emerged from the dawn haze like something out of myth-restricted airspace. Military checkpoints, and somewhere beneath it all, secrets that had shaped conspiracy theories for generations. Hendricks' authorization got them through security that would have been impenetrable otherwise. Though Jake saw the suspicious looks from guards, who knew something unprecedented was happening. The ship wasn't in the famous Area 51 that was a decoy, Hendricks explained, designed to draw attention away from the real sights. It was here, beneath Roswell, in a facility that predated the Cold War. They descended through layers of security into a hangar carved from solid rock. And there it was. The ship was beautiful, roughly triangular, about the size of a commercial jet. Its surface a dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No visible seams, no obvious propulsion systems. It simply existed, as if someone had carved it from a single piece of reality itself. Ash stumbled forward, pressing a hand against the hull. The ship responded immediately, light rippling across its surface in patterns that made Jake's eyes water. The alien projected recognition and relief. This was technology from Ash's people, or something compatible with it. Whether recovered from an earlier crash or salvaged from some ancient visit, it would work. "How do we get in?" Hendricks asked. Ash moved along the hull, fingers finding points that looked identical to Jake, but obviously meant something to the alien. A section of the ship simply dissolved, revealing an interior that was organically smooth, lit by bioluminescent panels. Space for maybe 6 occupants, with control surfaces that looked grown rather than built. "We don't have pilots trained for this," Hendricks said. "Well, we barely understand what makes it fly. Ash can pilot it," Sarah said. "But they're too weak to make the journey alone. Someone needs to go with them." Everyone looked at Jake. He felt the weight of that attention, understanding what was being asked. Leave Earth. Leave everything he'd ever known. Travel to some sanctuary among the stars with no guarantee of return, trusting an alien's word that there was a cure to be found, a weapon to be completed. "How long?" he asked. "How long to reach this sanctuary?" Ash projected complex calculations in human terms. Maybe 3 weeks' journey through spaces that didn't follow normal physics. 3 weeks there. Time to complete the weapon, 3 weeks back. Call it 2 months total, assuming everything went perfectly. Assuming the ship held together. Assuming the sanctuary still existed. "Jake, you don't have to do this," Sarah said. "We can find someone else." "No," Jake interrupted. "Ash trusts me. I don't know why, but they do. And I've come this far." He looked at the alien, whose 3 eyes reflected patterns from the ship's glow. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you actually come back to help us." Ash projected grateful determination. The alien moved toward the ship's interior, gesturing for Jake to follow. "Wait," Hendricks called out. He approached Jake, extending his hand. "Thank you for doing what's right even when it wasn't easy. And Cowboy?" He smiled grimly. "If you do come back, you've got a standing job offer with Homeland Security. We're going to need someone with your particular skills." Jake shook the agent's hand. "I'll keep ranching, thanks. But I appreciate the thought." He turned to Sarah, who looked like she wanted to say 1,000 things, but couldn't find words for any of them. Finally, she just hugged him hard. "Bring them back safe. And come back yourself. We'll need every good person we can get for what's coming. Hold them off as long as you can," Jake said. "And Sarah, that network of yours? Activate all of it. Humanity needs to know what's out there, what's coming. No more secrets." She nodded, tears in her eyes despite her smile. "No more secrets. Jake climbed into the ship, and the moment he was inside, the entrance sealed behind him. The interior was cramped by Earth standards, but clearly designed for beings of Ash's proportions. There were 2 acceleration couches that molded themselves to fit his body once he sat, and control surfaces that Ash was already interfacing with through direct touch. "Any advice for someone who's never been off-planet?" Jake asked. Ash projected amused reassurance. "Trust the ship, trust the pilot, and don't look directly at hyperspace when they made the jump." That last part was apparently critical for maintaining sanity. "Good to know," Jake muttered. The ship hummed to life. Jake felt it in his bones, a vibration that seemed to resonate with something fundamental in reality. Through the transparent sections of the hull, which Jake was certain hadn't been transparent a moment ago, he saw the hangar crew backing away. Hendricks stood at attention, saluting. Sarah wiped her eyes. Then the ship rose. Smoothly, silently, defying gravity with casual ease. They ascended through opening bay doors, through layers of facility, into the New Mexico morning. Alarms were sounding across the base. Through the ship's impossible visibility, Jake saw why. Huntercraft were descending toward Roswell, dozens of them, with more arriving every minute. The Convergence had committed fully to Earth's invasion, and they were starting with the facility that housed their escaped prey. "Time to go," Jake said unnecessarily. Ash's response was to push the ship harder. They shot upward with acceleration that should have pulped. Jake has organs, but somehow didn't the ship's interior maintain its own physics, independent of outside forces. The ground dropped away with terrifying speed. Within seconds, they broke through cloud cover. Within a minute, the curve of Earth became visible. Jake had seen pictures of his planet from space. Everyone had. The pictures didn't capture the reality. The fragile blue marble hanging in void, so small, so vulnerable. Down there, billions of people lived their lives unaware that the universe had just noticed them. That invasion forces were landing, that everything was about to change. "They'll be okay," Jake said. Whether to Ash or himself, he wasn't sure. "Humans are stubborn. We've survived worse." Ash projected uncertain agreement. Humanity had survived Earth-based threats. But the Convergence was something beyond Earth's experience, a force that had consumed countless civilizations across millions of years. Humanity's only advantage was forewarning and the weapon Ash carried. Without both, the outcome was certain. The ship continued accelerating. Earth shrank behind them, the sun a fierce point to their left. Space, Jake discovered, wasn't the serene void of documentaries. It was violent, energetic, filled with radiation and particles moving at impossible speeds. Only the ship's fields protected them from instant death. They passed the moon, and Jake caught a glimpse of something on the far side. Structures. Bases. Built by humans or something else. He couldn't tell. So many secrets. So much hidden from regular people, while governments and agencies played games with cosmic knowledge. "When this is over," Jake said, "no more hiding. People deserve to know what's really out there." Ash projected complete agreement. Secrecy had doomed the aliens people. By the time they realized the danger, it was too late to mount organized resistance. Earth had a chance to avoid that fate, but only if humanity united against a common threat. The ship reached the edge of Earth's orbital space, where satellites clustered in their designated lanes. Ash made adjustments, and suddenly space began to fold around them. Jake felt the transition like vertigo, like falling in every direction simultaneously, like the universe was a blanket being crumpled into a ball. "Is this the hyperspace thing?" He managed to gasp. Ash projected affirmation and urgent reminder, "Don't look directly at it." Too late. Jake's eyes had already tracked toward the viewports, where space had become something other than space. Geometries that shouldn't exist folded through dimensions the human mind wasn't equipped to process. Colors that had no names. Distances that were simultaneously infinite and zero. Jake's sanity began to fray at the edges. He understood, in that moment, why Ash's people had been vulnerable to the convergence. When you perceived reality at this level, when you could see the spaces between things, you became aware of the vast and terrible entities that lived in those spaces. The convergence was one such entity, but far from the only one. The universe was more crowded and more dangerous than humanity had ever imagined. He forced his eyes shut, concentrating on breathing, on the solid reality of the acceleration couch beneath him. Slowly, the vertigo passed. When he opened his eyes again, they transitioned fully into whatever space this was. The viewports showed something like stars, but wrong, too close, too bright, arranged in patterns that hurt to contemplate. How long in this ... space? Jake asked. Ash's response: 3 days to the first waypoint, where they dropped back to normal space to recalibrate. Then another jump, then another, each one taking them further from Earth and deeper into regions where humanity had never ventured. 3 days. Jake settled in, trying to find comfort in the alien furniture. Ash had collapsed into their own couch. The effort of piloting through the jump having drained reserves the alien couldn't spare. Jake watched the being's chest rise and fall in shallow breaths, saw the silver skin dimming again. "Stay with me," Jake said softly. "We've come too far for you to die now." Ash's projection was weak, but still present determination to survive, to complete the mission, to save 2 species with one desperate gambit. And beneath it all, something like fondness for the cowboy who'd found them dying in a desert and decided that compassion mattered more than caution. Jake kept watch as they traveled through impossible space. He ate from supplies the ship somehow provided, synthesized food that tasted like nothing and everything simultaneously. He slept in fitches, always waking with the disorientation of someone whose brain insisted they should be in a familiar bed on a familiar world. And he thought about his ranch, probably overrun by federal agents or huntercraft by now. About Sarah and Hendrix, trying to organize resistance against an enemy they barely understood. About humanity, taking its first stumbling steps into a cosmos that was far less empty and far more hostile than anyone had dreamed. His great-grandfather had claimed land in the Nevada desert, built something from nothing through sheer stubbornness. His grandfather had defended that land through drought and depression. His father had modernized it, adapted to changing times. And Jake ... Jake had left it behind to save it. To save everything. On the second day, Ash woke and managed to show Jake how to interface with the ship's systems. The technology was biological, intuitive in ways that human engineering wasn't. Jake found he could navigate through information by simply wanting to know. The ship responding to intent rather than commands. He learned about the Sanctuary, a hidden station beyond Orion, built by the remnants of a dozen species that had resisted the convergence. A place of research and preservation, where the last free scientists worked to understand and combat the infection spreading across civilizations. If anywhere could complete the weapon, it was there. He also learned about the weapon itself. It wasn't destructive in the traditional sense, didn't kill or explode. Instead, it severed the quantum entanglement that the convergence used to control infected individuals. It freed them, restored autonomy. But it had limitations, required massive energy, could only affect a limited area. And most critically, it was incomplete. Ash's people had theorized it, begun building it, but fell before they could test or perfect. The Sanctuary scientists had been working on the problem for decades, but they lacked the final piece, the core equations that Ash carried in their genetic memory. With that knowledge, they could finish the weapon, deploy it, give civilizations a fighting chance against the convergence. "No pressure," Jake muttered, and felt Ash's amused agreement. On the third day, they dropped back to normal space at a waypoint that was apparently the ruins of an ancient civilization. A gas giant with shattered rings and dead moons, each one showing evidence of cities that had risen and fallen long before humans learned to make fire. The ship refueled, somehow drawing energy from the gas giant as magnetic field, whilst Ash explained that this species had been one of the convergence's earliest victims. "How long has this been going on?" Jake asked. Ash projected staggering time scales, millions of years, possibly longer. The convergence was ancient, patient, inexorable. It spread slowly by cosmic standards, but it never stopped spreading. Every civilization that reached a certain technological threshold eventually encountered it. Most fell, a few fled. Almost none successfully fought back. Until now, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. They jumped again. Then again. Each transition through hyperspace became slightly easier to endure as Jake's mind adapted, or maybe just gave up trying to make sense of senseless geometries. He lost track of time, of distance. Space and duration meant different things out here. And then, finally, they arrived. The sanctuary revealed itself gradually as they dropped to normal space in what Ash indicated was the Orion Nebula region. At first, Jake saw only the nebula itself, clouds of gas and dust glowing with the light of newborn stars, beautiful and vast beyond comprehension. Then the ship's sensors highlighted something else. A structure hiding in the nebula's electromagnetic chaos, shielded by the very energies that made this region of space hostile to most technology. It was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, but clearly artificial. Built from materials that shouldn't exist, arranged in patterns that suggested both function and art in equal measure. "Welcome to the last free port in the galaxy," Jake whispered. Ash projected relief and homecoming. They were broadcasting now, identification codes that the sanctuary recognized. Response came quickly: clearance to approach, coordinates for docking, and something else: emotion, welcome, recognition of one of their own finally making it home. The ship navigated through the nebula's dangerous environment with Ash's expert piloting, approaching the sanctuary's outer structures. Jake saw ships from dozens of species, none human, docked at various ports. He saw beings moving through transparent corridors, each one different, each one representing a civilization that had chosen resistance over submission. They docked at a bay designed for ships of their size. The moment the seals locked, Ash collapsed fully. Jake caught the alien, feeling how light they'd become. The suit had nearly failed entirely. The silver skin was more gray than anything, and the three eyes barely focused. "No," Jake said firmly. "You don't die now. Not when we're this close." The bay doors opened. Beings rushed in, three of them, similar in structure to Ash but with subtle differences. They moved with urgent efficiency, scanning Ash with devices, speaking in that psychic language. Jake felt their alarm, their desperate hope. One of them turned to Jake, and he felt the psychic touch: surprise, gratitude, and rapid evaluation. This human had brought Ash home. This human had protected one of their own across impossible distances. "Can you save them?" Jake asked aloud. The response was a wash of determined affirmation. They could save Ash. Barely. The suit could be repaired, injuries treated. But it would be close. The alien had been running on willpower for the last week. They took Ash from Jake's arms, moving the injured being onto a floating gurney. As they rushed deeper into the sanctuary, one of them paused to project directly at Jake gratitude, invitation to follow, and something like respect. Jake followed through corridors that were simultaneously alien and welcoming. The sanctuary had been built by many species working together, and its architecture reflected that diversity. He passed beings of a dozen types, some humanoid, others completely foreign. All of them paused to study the human walking through their midst. First contact, multiplied by every species present. They reached a medical facility that looked like it belonged in a science fiction dream. Ash was placed on a platform surrounded by technology Jake couldn't begin to understand. The beings worked with practiced coordination, clearly experienced in dealing with suit failures and traumatic injuries. Jake stood back, watching, feeling utterly out of his depth. He was a rancher from Nevada who'd gotten lucky and stubborn in equal measure. Now he stood in an alien space station, surrounded by the remnants of civilizations fleeing extinction, watching scientists try to save the being who'd become the most important person in his life. Hours passed. Jake was given food synthesized but surprisingly good and shown to a small observation room where he could watch the medical work continue. One of the beings, older looking with darker silver skin, approached him. It projected introduction name untranslatable, role something like station elder, and questions. Jake told the story. Everything, from finding Ash under the Joshua tree to escaping hunters to the desperate flight through space. The elder listened without interruption, projecting occasional understanding and approval. When Jake finished, the elder shared information in return. The sanctuary had been tracking the weapon's signal, had known someone from Ash's people still lived and carried the knowledge they needed. But they'd assumed that being was lost. The hunters had been too close, Earth too primitive to offer meaningful sanctuary. "We're more stubborn than we look," Jake said with a tired smile. The elder projected amused agreement. They'd noticed. The fact that humanity had protected Ash, fought corrupted hunters, and gotten one of their own across space to deliver the weapon's final components, it spoke well of human potential. The Convergence had noticed Earth, but humanity had also caught the attention of the Resistance. "Can you really complete the weapon?" Jake asked. The elder projected confident affirmation. With Ash's genetic memories accessed, they could finish the equations, test the weapon, deploy it not just to save Ash's people, but to protect Earth during its vulnerable development period. It would take time, weeks, maybe months, but it could be done. And then what? We arm humanity and hope for the best? The elder's response was more nuanced. They would provide guidance, technology, knowledge, help humanity prepare for what was coming. But ultimately, Earth's fate would be in human hands. That's how resistance worked. Each species had to choose for itself whether to fight or fall. A commotion drew their attention back to the medical bay. Ash was sitting up, silver skin glowing with renewed vitality. The suit had been repaired, injuries treated. The alien looked weak but alive, and those three eyes found Jake immediately. The psychic projection hit Jake with emotional force, profound gratitude, deep affection, and fierce determination. Ash had survived. Against impossible odds, carrying impossible burden, they'd survived. And now they could complete what they'd started. Jake felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. "Yeah," he said softly. "You made it." Ash projected question on Earth. Still standing when we left. Sarah and Hendricks were going to do what they could. Jake moved closer to the medical platform. "How long before the weapon is ready?" The elder responded 6 weeks minimum, possibly 8. They needed to extract the genetic memories carefully, translate them into usable equations, build the weapon components, and test everything. Rushing risked catastrophic failure. "Earth might not have 8 weeks, Jake said. Ash projected determined agreement, which is why they'd work without sleeping, without rest, throwing every resource the sanctuary had at the problem. The Convergence had revealed itself to Earth prematurely. That gave humanity a narrow window to prepare, but only if the weapon was ready in time. The elder projected proposal Jake should stay, not just to wait for the weapon's completion, but to learn. The sanctuary would teach him everything they could about galactic civilization, the Convergence, resistance tactics. Make him humanity's first true ambassador to the wider cosmos. "I'm just a rancher," Jake protested. The elder's response carried gentle amusement. He was a rancher who'd protected a refugee, fought corruption, and traveled across space to deliver hope. That made him exactly the kind of human the galaxy needed to meet. Jake looked at Ash, at the medical staff, at the elder with their ancient eyes. Thought about Earth, about Sarah fighting to prepare humanity for war, about his ranch abandoned and probably destroyed. Thought about the choice he'd made under that Joshua tree that had led to this moment. "All right," he said, "teach me. And let's make sure when I go home, I'm bringing more than just a weapon. Let's bring humanity a fighting chance."